Hey y'all, fisherman, apostle, and pumpkin eater. These are just a few words that describe Peter. Today, Peter is often considered one of the greatest of the apostles, and throughout the New Testament, we get to see Peter at different points in his life. But just like any other man, Peter led an imperfect life. So today, I'm going to start examining the life of Peter. So you better pay attention for Pete's sake. Imagine that you're working in tech support. You're helping a customer fix their computer, and you've tried everything you can think of, but nothing's working. Then, a man walks up to you and says, try lightly tapping the other side of the computer 3 times. Most of us would probably think, there's no point in trying that. There's no way it's gonna work. But that's essentially what Peter did when Jesus told him to cast his nets on the other side of the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they had caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Personally, I often have trouble appreciating just how miraculous this must have seemed to Peter, James, and John. They'd been fishing all night long and hadn't caught anything. They were probably tired and wanted to go home. And yet, when Jesus told them to cast their nets one more time, Peter didn't hesitate to follow his command, and it certainly paid off. This is a great example of how strong faith in Jesus can literally change your life. But Peter's story isn't about him being perfect. We often think of Peter as this larger-than-life character, but Peter strikes me as more of a common man. He has strong faith, but he sometimes lets fear get in the way of that faith. We see a great example of this in Matthew 14. Despite all the miracles Peter's seen Jesus do, he still lets his fear overcome him. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, do not be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. Now, I've never been in a boat in the middle of a storm, but I can imagine it's pretty terrifying. And if I saw someone that looked like a ghost walking towards me on the water, I'd be scared out of my mind. Well, unless it's my dad, because it'd be pretty great to see him again. But Peter demonstrates incredible faith in Jesus when he asks to join him on the water. After all, this is Jesus. He's turned water into wine, summoned a bunch of fish, and is now walking on water. Jesus must be the Son of God. Well, either that or Aquaman. But Aquaman can't turn water into wine, so it's probably the first one. And if Jesus is the Son of God, then helping Peter walk on water should be no big deal. And at first it wasn't. Peter was successfully able to walk on the water. But then Peter made a mistake that I think too many of us often do. He took his eyes off Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and, beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. While Peter remained focused on Jesus, his faith remained so great that he could literally walk on water. But Peter took his eyes off Jesus, and when he saw the wind and the waves, he became afraid and lost faith. The Hebrew writer tells us in chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. We can take great comfort in the fact that Jesus died for us. Just about any bad thing you've been through, Jesus has been through worse. And while that doesn't diminish your pain, I always find it comforting to know when there's other people that have gone through the same things that I have, or worse. And while that doesn't diminish your pain, I always find it comforting to find out that there are other people with similar or worse struggles than me. A lot of us have the same problems that Peter had. When times get hard, our faith can take a hit. and that's completely understandable. It's certainly something I've struggled with, but that's alright. Peter's story doesn't end with Jesus getting mad at him for losing faith. Peter eventually learns to have complete faith in Jesus, and puts his neck out on the line to teach people about him. We all face tough times that can shake our faith. During those times, it may be helpful to remember Paul's advice to the Philippian church. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. When those tough times hit, we have two options. We can become scared or anxious, or we can put our faith in Jesus. We can dwell on those fears and lose faith, or we can turn to God. Worshipping and praying to God may not solve your problems. In fact, I've often found that worship and prayer do little to solve my problems. But worshipping and praying can bring you a sense of peace and calm. After all, there's something very comforting about knowing there's someone out there who loves you and is caring for you. And that peace and calm is often the first step to figuring out the solution to your problems, if there are any. But first, you have to take that first step and follow Jesus. Peter's life is a fascinating one. He went from being a poor fisherman to one of the 12 apostles, to being one of the most important leaders of the early church. But none of that would have happened if Peter hadn't taken the first step, following Jesus. In Luke 5:11, we learn that Peter, James, and John leave everything behind to follow Jesus because of their immense faith in him. And in Matthew 14, we see that Peter lets fear get the best of him, and he starts to lose faith. I often think of Peter as this great man, someone whose faith was so strong that he somehow became better than the rest of us. He's revered by some Christians as a saint, a holy person of immense faith. But that's not Peter's story. Peter is a sinner, a righteous person, a doubter, a believer, a coward, and one of the bravest men in the Bible. And, as we'll discuss next week, Peter's a great example of how Jesus doesn't stop loving you, even when you lose faith. I hope you enjoyed this video. I post a new devotional every week. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends. Have a great week.